The Maple Leafs head into the nation's capital and get a shootout win over the Senators. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Ottawa, where the Maple Leafs won their second in as many nights, 5-4, in a wild shootout win over the Senators, 93-51, where the shot attempts in favor of the Senators, but it's Alex Kerfoot winning it for the Maple Leafs in the shootout, as the Leafs generally, Dave, don't do very well in these situations when they get that far. We saw, of course, them get shut out in a shootout just the other night where their three shooters were not able to get the job done. But go figure, it's Alex Kerfoot, of all people, that comes through. This is a guy who's had a lot of trouble over the years scoring on breakaways, and when the Leafs needed him the most, he steps up in a big spot. But clearly the atmosphere, always great when these two teams square off, whether it's in Toronto or Ottawa. But just, watching it on the broadcast tonight, felt like there was a little extra oomph for this one.
Yeah, for sure. And, one of the reasons why we like going to these games, not only just because it's on the road and you get to see a lot of the Leaf fans that travel and all that fun stuff, but because this game was close, usually toward the end of the regulation time, and it's a building we're not familiar with, we're heading to like the waiting area to talk to players after the game and watching on a monitor, seeing the game tied, seeing it go to overtime, and then in the shootout. And where we're kind of waiting is right next to the Leafs staff, where everything is going on by their bench. And so it was funny just watching all these players kind of cycle through in the 9 rounds of the shootout. And I believe it was round number 8 when it was Bobby McMann's turn. And, we're already thinking of the narrative here if he's going to score. And you could just even hear staff around being like, whoa, like getting really excited when Bobby McMann's number is called to go for that shootout winner. And it's fun to just kind of see that stuff and see how the staff kind of reacts to those kind of moments. Pretty wild. Leafs hadn't won a shootout game in their previous 2 attempts. Go figure, it was going to take 3 games worth of a shootout for them to win this one. 3 times 3, of course. So, it was pretty wild. Matt Murray really had to kind of earn that W there, both in terms of the shot attempts, like you mentioned, but the saves that he had to make, and the fact that Ottawa had a goal, then it was called off on offside challenge. Then they get one with 11 seconds anyway. And you just kind of figured, back and forth, here we go. This is kind of crazy. So just a fun game to be at, to watch. Certainly from a coaching standpoint, I'm sure there's a lot that they're going to pick apart, but also the fatigue factor coming in back to back. There was a lot going on in this game. No Mark Giordano as well. So just a crazy game all around, but you could certainly feel the excitement here in Canada.
Yeah, I imagine it was an awesome one to be at tonight. And you mentioned, Matt Murray coming up big in this one, and it's Alex Kerfoot winning the game, but you could make the case that, Matt Murray deserved that honor as well, making 6 saves in the shootout, 48 saves during regulation and overtime, and 18 alone in the first period. He was definitely put to work in this game against his former team, and had some terrible luck in this one as well. I mean, that first goal that the Senators scored, I don't think I've ever seen a goal scored like that before, where there's a deflection, 10 feet in front of the net, and the puck goes like 15 feet in the air and then drops behind the goalie and into the net. Later on the game tying goal, it's some bad bounces that end up in the back of the net. So, all things considered, for, Matt Murray to stand strong despite that incredible workload tonight is really impressive. I think back to the game earlier this year when he made, 44 saves in a shutout against the Dallas Stars.
Yeah.
That one was an impressive one for sure. But, I think you look tonight and the box score maybe doesn't jump off the page because, yet again, he gave up 4 goals, which has been a pretty tough trend for him here. But yeah, I would say, 3 of them probably were not his fault.
Yeah, and look, it's going to be a save percentage well above 900. I can't remember what the math is. I think it was, 52 saves he made tonight? Or 52 shots were the total?
Yeah, it was, I think it was 48.
Right.
Saves,
so that's still going to be a
overall
save percentage in above 900, which, I mean, you'll take that, especially for that kind of workload, right?
923.
That's pretty good. Like that's not bad considering the workload. He really had to work through it. Now, I'm sure maybe for his psyche, having a game where he didn't allow 4 goals and maybe 5, if you want to count the the called back goal, I guess, would have been better for everything all around to kind of feel better about it. But this game was won, or at least getting the points in the standings was won because of Matt Murray's stellar play in that first period. That was a crazy first period. It looked like the Leafs just kind of couldn't get going, couldn't get a cohesive pass. And then it really just changed on that power play opportunity where it was just a disaster for them, allowing a shorthanded goal to kind of come back and then get one on the power play afterwards. So just it was a high event game, but it was just a crazy game in that way. And then so I don't know what to take of this. This was a desperate Ottawa team. You would like to think that the Leafs would have been able to put more of a stamp on this game. And there's been just a lot of these games now where there's just periods or stretches where there's just bad plays or odd man rushes going back the other way where they're getting burned on. And it's kind of sticking. And I don't know how you coach that because, yeah, you have all these new guys and you're rotating things in and you know what you're capable of. And you're kind of dismissing these games, but you also don't want to let these things kind of creep in and kind of linger and hang around for when the playoffs happen. It's kind of hard to switch on and switch off. So I don't really know what to make of this. This was a very hungry Ottawa team that really wanted to show something against the Maple Leafs and really still trying to fight for one of those last wildcard spots. But I was a little bit concerned by just how many odd man rushes the Leafs were getting up the other way.
Well, I wanted to get to this part, but you kind of brought it up a little bit here just with how poorly the Maple Leafs played in this one at times, and the numbers have just not really looked, in their favor of late. 7 of these last 9 games, they've been under 50% as far as the expected goal share goes. 5 of the last 9, they've been under 40%, which is absolutely horrific. Like that's how the worst teams in the league, fare against elite top opponents around the NHL. So, the numbers don't look great for the Leafs right now, but they continue to get wins. So, that's where things kind of get crossed a little bit when you're trying to analyze these games. And I think this week's tough too, because, it's 5 games in 7 days and it's against some pretty good opponents, and they came away with some big wins here as well. And I guess on the one hand, you could say come playoff time, it's about getting wins. The Maple Leafs have done their fair share of winning the expected goal, contest, but not coming away with victories in the playoffs and in the postseason. And things are kind of going the opposite way right now. But it kind of just gets back to what you're saying, where, how do you analyze some of these games right now with, the injuries they're dealing with, the rotations, the different lineups, and that they're still getting some of these wins. It's kind of an odd time to, try to analyze what they're doing on.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to their credit against Carolina, I thought that was a good example of kind of gritting out a win and also playing better. Like Carolina dominated in terms of the Corsi and the possession, like the straight possession. But in terms of the expected goals and the quality of the stuff, Toronto was the better opponent. You could see it. They were going into the interior. What I didn't like about this game was how easily Ottawa went into Toronto's interior, which I had not seen Ottawa do with such ease in quite a long time. And you know what? Maybe it was a long time overdue, because I look at this Ottawa team, I look at the talent that they have, and, myself included, I was one of those guys that put them as a wild card team, but was going to actually perform well to start the year. It didn't come together. And only as of the last month and a bit or so, they were kind of finding their groove and becoming that team. So I don't know. It's interesting. They are getting better quality opponents now at times where, there's Carolina, there's all these other teams. There's Buffalo that's better and more improved now. So maybe it's a better template where before the Leafs were kind of having consecutive games against these teams that were just at the basement, and we were criticizing other elements of their game. So I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I think, they're still getting points out of this. So that's the good thing. But maybe it's just a symptom of the luxury that they have, that they just really can't go above 2 right now in the division. They're trying to push ahead of Tampa and create some separation. Home ice is still important, but more important than that is getting these new guys ingratiated with the system. Jake McCabe getting his first goal, I think, helps in that regard with the Maple Leafs and some of the other things that they're doing, that it's going to be good. But at some point or another, where they now go on this 4-game road trip into the United States, I think they have to kind of find what their identity is. There is going to be a bit of a mix, as you'll hear later on in this podcast, in terms of the defense, but you still need to find consistency with guys in and out. And I don't think just guys coming in and out is going to be enough of an excuse for some of the lapses that we're seeing.
Yeah, and you're right. We'll get to the defensive side of things and hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe. But let's hear from the man of the game for this one, I would say, for the Maple Leafs, Matt Murray, who, as we mentioned, made 48 saves in regulation, 6 more in the shootout. Murray was asked post-game what it was like to be in a game like that.
It was a really exciting game. Pretty electric atmosphere out there. Both sides had a lot of fans in the crowd, and both sides were real loud, a lot of energy, so it was a real fun game.
Any conversations with some old teammates in the crease there or anything?
Yeah, a couple here and there.
Yeah, I can imagine it was a fun one.
It was
for
really
Murray.
rough in front of his net, especially in that first period. Like, there was a lot of chippiness that I thought, okay, I wonder if this is Ottawa's game plan and if it's working, that they're just going to go into the blue paint with reckless abandon. And for the most part, it looked like it was working. But credit to Murray, he was standing tall and he was unfazed by that. And maybe that's some of that playoff swagger that the Leafs kind of like about Murray, that he wasn't too fazed by some of the extracurriculars that was happening in front of the crease. Sure, they have some reinforcements in Shen and McCabe that can kind of help in that regard. But when you have a goaltender who's unfazed by some of the rust stuff in front, that's just as important, that to have that kind of confidence, knowing that that's not going to be an issue for your team.
Yeah, that's huge. And, Murray this year, every time, there's action around the crease or, he gets bumped into, I think everybody kind of, takes a step back and is like, okay, is he going to get up? Is it going to be all right? Because you're always concerned that, he's going to pick up another injury or another knock here. But luckily tonight, that was not the case. And he made it through this game. But as he said, there was, a little bit of chatter with some ex-teammates and, clearly some added motivation for him coming back to Ottawa. You could hear the fans kind of give it to him a little bit at times, especially there was one moment in the game where the Leafs were hemmed in their own zone. And Murray, once again, just so happened to, the net comes off. And who knows if it was unintentional or, intentionally by accident. But regardless, he was able to get the whistle and the Leafs were able to get a line change. But I can't imagine that there's too many Senators fans that were rooting for Matt Murray tonight in this one. But if it wasn't Murray and if it wasn't Kerfoot, maybe Calle Jarnkrok is the player of the game. A pair of goals, and Jarnkrok, Dave, now with a career-high 17 goals. We touched on him earlier in the week on one of the post-game pods about, how well he's been playing and continues to get the bump, the push, if you will, if we're going to use a wrestling term, to the top line here with Austin Matthews. And he's looked really good. 5 goals now in 9 March games, which really pops off the page right now for a guy who is struggling so much in the first couple of weeks of the season. But before we get to Jarnkrok, let's hear from Austin Matthews, who set up Jarnkrok on that second goal.
You know what? I picked my head up and I heard, I want to say it was Carbs on our bench, or assistant coach there, screaming that I had a guy with me. Because I was kind of fumbling with the puck a little bit. I didn't really catch it too clean, and I looked up and I saw Yarny kind of slashing down the wall and just tried to get it to him in a good spot, and he did the rest. So it was a really nice kind of heads-up play by the bench, and obviously him getting open.
Yeah, that was a huge goal for the Maple Leafs at that stage of the game. For Jarnkrok, it was his second goal of the game, Dave. And he said post-game that the team's performance was pretty strong in this one, despite maybe some of the numbers we talked about.
He was great, especially in the first period. They all played us in the first for sure, and he kept us in the game.
Where do you think it turned from that first period? Like, is there a moment that you kind of felt it was kind of back in control for you guys?
I think just after first we knew we had to do something different to stay in that game, and I thought we came out much better in the second.
Yeah, it was much better second period for the Maple Leafs, including Calle Jarnkrok's first goal of the game to make it 3-2 at the time. And I tweeted after that first goal, Dave, where it was a big one-time clapper by Jarnkrok to score it, that there are moments where this guy looks like Alex Ovechkin. Like, he just takes huge bombs, and they don't always hit the target or go in the net, but when they do, it's pretty impressive. And then he had the big snipe there for goal number 2. But 17 goals now, on pace for over 20. Sheldon Keefe continues to sing this guy's praises. I don't think he's going anywhere, away from this top line anytime soon. I mean, he hasn't done anything to deserve being taken off that line, at least with Austin Matthews.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. Before that clip aired, I actually asked Austin Matthews, and the answer there was, I asked him if he saw Jarnkrok coming and he was looking past the whole time, or if he was thinking maybe he would shoot it. And then that's when he gave that answer, because Austin Matthews is such a prolific scorer. I thought he might do something fancy with it. And he just called his own number in that regard. And it was interesting to just kind of see that kind of develop. And that was the second game in a row that Jarnkrok was playing with Matthews. And the justification there is that Jarnkrok, when you give him good players, he can do some pretty great things with it. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but when Nashville was in town, Philip Forsberg was singing this guy's praises, longtime Nashville Predator, saying a lot of people underestimate what Calle Jarnkrok can do. If you put good players with him, he's really going to do some magic with it. And so I think you saw that. I think you've been seeing that. You saw it on the second line when he was playing with Marner and Tavares for long stretches this season. And what I think this allowed now with Kerfoot in there, and then when Ryan O'Reilly comes back, is just for the Leafs to not look at themselves as a top 6 team in terms of forwards anymore. I think you're now going to see a pivot, and there's going to be more of a focus on just going with a top 9 look. And your fourth line is really just going to kind of be deployed there in situations where you figure, okay, just to rest the bottom 9 guys, or the top 9 guys, I should say, for the playoffs as you kind of shorten your bench. The fourth line will bring you energy, but now you have spread out weapons. You saw that with Nylander on the third line tonight, getting a little bit of a look with Bobby McMahon, who is coming back for the first time in a while. And I think that that's what's going to happen going forward here when Ryan O'Reilly comes back and they start experimenting a little bit more with a spread out offense, spread out the lines. And Jarnkrok, there was a lot of questions if they need to replace a top 6 winger because Jarnkrok's not the solution. Well, maybe he was a solution, and the question wasn't if they needed the winger there. It was if they just needed more of a spread out offense. And certainly he's showing that right now.
Yeah, it's been an interesting fit there on that top line with Austin Matthews. And like you said, the way that Sheldon Keefe is spreading the offense right now. And, as we keep saying, with these different lineups that he keeps working with, whether it's at forward, on the back end, now's the time to try to find these things and figure out, if it's something that you can feel comfortable with heading into the playoffs. Because, we know Sheldon Keefe loves to throw the lines in a blender. We know he likes to try different things. And, even tonight, despite how the game started with the way that the lines were, we saw different combinations. At some point you would see, Matthews, Tavares, and Marner, or you would see Matthews, Nylander, and Marner. So there's still an opportunity for, the top guys to end up playing together, even though that, Sheldon Keefe is maybe starting periods with different combinations of different lines. But as we keep saying, with Calle Jarnkrok, he's just doing things right now that are working alongside Austin Matthews. There seems to be a chemistry there, whether it's a guy like Alex Kerfoot on that top line, or, whether it's Mitch Marner there. It just seems like Calle Jarnkrok is a fixture in the top 6. Let's just put it that way. And as you said, come playoff time, it's most likely going to be a top 9, and he's going to slot in somewhere, which is pretty impressive, the run that he is on right now. But Mitch Marner as well did score in this one. It came at a big time too, after the Senators took the lead 2-1 on a goal by Tim Stützle that came short-handed. Marner responded just about 30 seconds later on the power play, his 26th of the season. He says the opportunity to shoot opened up for him.
I mean, I think everyone knows I'm a pass first guy, so kind of just saw us close with 2 or 3 on 1 there at the net, and kind of looked to fake shot. D-man didn't have many options, so saw a laneway, tried to take it, and went in.
Yeah, it did go in, and interesting that Sheldon Keefe, comes back with the A unit. I know they weren't on the ice for the goal, Dave, that they gave up for the Tim Stützle shorthanded goal, but that's sort of maybe the benefit there, where the B unit is out there, they give up the goal, and you could come right back with the A unit, as opposed to some of the goals we've seen this year, where it's the A unit that gives up the shorty, but it's the B unit that comes back out and can't get that equalizing goal.
Yeah, I mean, not to leave the A unit completely off the hook, because before that shorthanded goal, the shifts by that A unit were god awful. Like, they were really bad.
They were bad.
They were really bad, to the point where I didn't blame them at all for going through that. And then I felt bad for Timothy Liljegren in this game, because up until that point, he was having a pretty rough first period. And then that happens, and I'm just like, oh, I wonder if this is going to be a point where Timothy Liljegren is either possibly going to get benched, or if he's, doing a disservice to himself in terms of the calculation as to who the starting sixth defenseman will be for the playoffs after some of the shifts that we saw from him. So, it was kind of rough all around in that regard. It was an interesting deployment on defense too, because you had a lot of duplication in terms of skill, and what kind of guys do in that regard. So you saw a lot of jumbling there, but, going back to the power play point that you're making, it was a quick reaffirmation. It's not often you see the Leafs give up a shorty and score on the same power play opportunity. We've seen them give up 2 shorthanded goals in one power play opportunity not too long ago. It was kind of interesting in that regard that they were able to kind of just, get their bearings, go figure stuff out. And good for the PP1, because as long as PP1 is scoring, and Morgan Rielly, even though he didn't score it, is still becoming a factor in it, it's going to help Morgan Rielly's confidence too. And that's a better thing all around for a lot of the units and what they can do there. Plus PP2 is missing Ryan O'Reilly. Like, I'm curious, once he gets back, and what kind of factors in there, what that PP2 can really be about.
Yeah. The situation with Ryan O'Reilly is going to loom large when he's able to return, and it's just going to set everything up so much better with this Maple Leafs lineup, because, as you mentioned before, we saw him make his return. Bobby McMahon to the NHL level had another opportunity to score during the game and was not able to. Big save by Matt Sogard. And then you touched on it, had the opportunity to win the game in the shootout, did not score there as well. I feel bad for the guy. He's just on an absolute tear in the American Hockey League, where he scored like 18 goals in 18 games or something crazy like that during a stretch. And since coming to the NHL, hasn't been able to find the back of the net yet. But, I thought tonight, there were moments that he stood out, and then there were other moments where he wasn't really, much of a presence in this one. I mean, it's tough when you only play 7 minutes tonight, and maybe that was more about the situations that the Leafs found them in, trying to protect the lead in the third period, that he was pretty limited in this one. But what do you think is sort of the situation for him moving forward here with Noel Acciari? I mean, we got an update that Acciari did not suffer a concussion, or hasn't been diagnosed with a concussion, according to Sheldon Keefe. So no timetable yet for his return. But if Acciari does have to miss some time, is Bobby McMahon a guy that's going to stay in the lineup here, or might he get kind of shuttled back and forth, you think?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, with everybody healthy, I don't see room for him. If there are injuries and they need a next man up person, he certainly could factor. It was kind of interesting that, Alex Steeves, who had been an option, called up, sent down, even when he was up for the last couple of days, had not been on the ice skating. So I'm curious as to kind of what led to that. I mean, look, Bobby McMahon had an injury that kept him out for a long period of time, and then he comes back. He gets a hat trick in his first game back. And in the 2 games that he's played with the Marlies since getting called up again, he's got, combined 3 goals. Certainly is a factor. I liked him with William Nylander tonight. That opportunity that you were talking about, nice little feed from Nylander right in front of the net, but unfortunately he just shot it right at the goaltender. That was just like, he was also too close to the net too. So it was kind of easy for Sogard to just kind of come out, make himself big. And there just wasn't a lot of room for McMahon. There was maybe a little bit on the far side, but as soon as the puck gets the stick, he's releasing it quick, and Sogard was there. I thought Sogard was pretty good as well, in that spot. But, yeah, I would like to see more Bobby McMahon. If the Leafs do go 11-7 at times, it's especially going to make it tougher for someone like McMahon to get in the lineup. I know there's been a lot of discourse about 11-7 lately, but I do think at times it will be necessary if the Leafs go deep and they have the defensive depth over the forward depth. If there's more defensive injuries, then maybe they don't do that. Yeah, I like what I saw from Bobby McMahon. It's going to come eventually for him. Remember, he did have that goal. I think it was in Detroit that got called back on a challenge. So he has kind of scored one in that regard, but unfortunately it just hasn't worked out for him, in terms of getting one, but his time is coming. You just see his game improving with each time that he's up here. I thought tonight was great evidence of that. And at some point he's going to get it.
Yeah. I mean, he just flashes, every once in a while. The speed is evident. He's a big body, gets to the front of the net, and yeah, he's going to score at some point. Maybe it's not this year, depending on the opportunity that he gets, but I feel like Bobby McMahon at some point will score a National Hockey League goal, and it'll be a great moment for the Alberta native. Coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we will get to the Bodog line of the day. We'll also get an update on Ilya Samsonov, who did not dress for this one as Joseph Woll was recalled to take his spot as the backup behind Matt Murray. So we'll get an update on that. But the Maple Leafs get the win 5-4 tonight in a shootout over the Senators. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog Free Casino Games and Sports Odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It's Rink Wide Toronto, pre-game, post-game, every game. It is Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Ottawa as the Maple Leafs pick up 5-4 shootout win over the Senators. Time for the Bodog line of the day. And Jake McCabe, if you picked him to score a goal tonight, you are a richer person. Let's put it that way. If you threw down a wager on the Maple Leafs defenseman. And Dave, it's been a long time coming here. It feels like McCabe's gotten some great opportunities in his early Maple Leafs career, but has not been able to put it in the back of the net, and finally did for the opening goal of this one, as it was his third of the season. We've been seeing a lot more lately from McCabe, jumping up in the play, jumping up in the rush, kind of as that trailer from time to time. And we also saw him paired up with Timothy Liljegren tonight, with Mark Giordano sitting. Before we get your thoughts, let's hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe, who was asked about the recent rotation on the back end with guys sitting out.
Well, to be honest, we've had a discussion with all of our defense leading into this weekend and just going down the stretch, just to let them know there's going to be times where guys are going to get time off, whether it's bumps and bruises or rest or workload, that guys are going to be coming out to give them some time. And you know, while we're healthy here, we want to keep everybody involved. So the work was done in advance of that, and Gio took it really well, as did Gustafson. Because to me, Gus is coming off of his best game last night. Our plan going in was to have him come out today. We decided to stay with that, but it was tough because he played well. But like I said, we have had the conversation with all of our D that situations like this will come up.
Yeah, maybe tonight not the best game to analyze the numbers and stats for any of the defensemen. They was all pretty horrific. Just taking a look at it right now, I mean, McCabe Liljegren outshot 21-14. Holland Brody, 30-11. Riley and Shen, 12-10. I mean, you know, that's going to be the case when the Senators have the 93-51 shot attempt advantage in this one. But what did you make of the defense tonight as far as the blue line goes?
I think this was an excellent case for what the Leafs look like. Not excellent in favor. I mean, this is what happens when you don't have Mark Giordano in the lineup. This is the first time. This is the first time since he's been here, since he was acquired, when they haven't had him for any reason. And so I was shocked when I saw that, because, you know, we've talked to him at times where we thought about, is the amount of minutes that he's playing in place of injured guys earlier in the season going to be a problem? And he's like, no, I prefer to keep playing. Like, I like to keep the motor running. I think that's actually what it's doing. And it's kind of counter to kind of what the Leafs and the sports science people and all these like all these other metrics that track a 39-year-old that they just don't want to overwork, right? So I was kind of surprised. That's why I asked that question in the post game tonight. Was that kind of difficult to, like, specifically in his case, because he's the guy who just likes to keep playing and you wonder how it's going to get interpreted. The way the Leafs look today, I think, is a great example of Giordano staying in the lineup. I'm sure there will be other games where they elect to keep him out, probably in one of these games where they feel tired, just because it's kind of a throwaway game, if you want to consider any of them throwaway games. But yeah, I think this was an excellent case, or maybe a concern if someone like a Mark Giordano goes down, how the Leafs could be in a little bit of trouble. He's an analytics darling for a reason. Norris Trophy winner in 2019. The way he's been playing, he doesn't seem distantly removed from that. It's not like a Jason Spezza type situation in terms of, yeah, the cap hit is like that, but in terms of his effectiveness, he's very identical to a degree of the player he was when he was asked to be elevated. When he was asked by the team to elevate when guys were hurt, he played like the Mark Giordano of old. And so I think without Giordano, the Leafs kind of looked a bit discombobulated tonight. I think when he comes back into lineup, I think you'll see a little bit more of a succinct D with him back in.
Yeah, you don't really want to read too much into the pairings tonight and what because this is not the normal Maple Leafs lineup that they have on the back end without Mark Giordano. So, McCabe, Liljegren, I thought they had some moments where they were okay, and of course some moments where they were not very good in their own end. Same goes for Brody and Hall, and Riley and Shen, which is also interesting that that's been the combination that Sheldon Keefe has seemingly gone with when Luke Shen has come into the lineup, that he's paired up with Morgan Riley, and tonight for Shen played just 13 minutes despite being part of a 6 defenseman rotation, as opposed to the 11 and 7 that we've been seeing. But, what have you made of that duo and that combination since they've been put together? I think a lot of people felt like it was a no-brainer that you have, the Morgan Riley, a type of defenseman that gets up in the rush, is more of that offensive guy, and then you've got the stay-at-home guy, Luke Shen, on the other side.
Yeah, I like it, but like my concern with Luke Shen in that role, and this is why the minutes were limited. Like they have to do this constant rotation with the defense because, it's not even that Luke Shen hasn't played in a while. Yeah, this is his second game back and all that other stuff. But, he was averaging 17 minutes a night on a really bad team. But his actual template and role on a good team, let's be real, is a 6-7 guy. And so it's kind of similar to what they did with Lyubushkin, where Riley can rotate with that guy, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot of Riley Brody. And you saw that even in this game. There's going to be the Brody Halls and those other things, but you're still going to see a lot of Riley Brody pairs, and you're going to see that kind of stick. And so essentially the other D pair that Riley was playing with was Brody. And you look at the minutes, who logged the most, it's going to be Brody Riley every day of the week, essentially. So, it makes sense. And I would like to kind of see if that can kind of work. If Luke Shen was a little bit more in his prime, it's like the perfect duo of shut down physical presence with offensive defensemen. If they can get a sync and they can get it work. My only concern is that, Luke Shen is not the 17 minutes per game guy. And then when you're moving Morgan Riley around to kind of split, it doesn't bring out the best in Morgan Riley, where over the last couple of games, I think you can see that when Riley's playing with Brody consistently and there isn't a lot of deviation from that, it seems to work out better for the Leafs. So, there is some template I can see when Luke Shen is kind of mixed in that could be a pair that they kind of go with consistently, but I like Riley Brody more often and then kind of figuring out stuff out. But I think it's just seeing where Riley or make that Shen kind of fits in terms of how many minutes he can log on a daily basis, because what he did with Vancouver and what he's going to do with Toronto are just not going to be the same.
So you were obviously there, so you could get more context into this, but just, hearing that clip, it felt like Sheldon Keefe kind of threw Eric Gustafsson out there unprompted.
Yep.
With regards to, talking about how well he played against, in his last game, of course. And, he's a guy that the Leafs brought over in the Rasmus Sandin deal with Washington, and they've tried him out in a bunch of different situations here, running power play 2 when he's out there. He's been paired up with Morgan Rielly at times. He's been paired up with Mark Giordano. The overall numbers don't look particularly great, and part of that has to do with this recent stretch of hockey that the Leafs have been playing. They've been just getting outshot and outchanced for the most part. But why? Well, what is it, do you think, about this guy that the coaching staff seems to be enamored with? That he has something that they feel maybe they can provide to this team that maybe they don't already.
I think
have.
He's an easy fix for when something goes wrong, but you also don't want to project or make someone feel like they're just an extra there. So I think there's a lot of coaching and controlling the message going on where, if they need power play help, he can jump in. Should something happen to Rielly or PP1's not being effective and they need to make that adjustment, it's something that he can do. But also if they need a depth guy and someone goes down, they can move him into the left and right side and he can kind of get engaged in the game. I think this is controlling the message and making him feel like part of the team when there is a huge glut, because, like yourself, I was questioning in games that I'm watching, where does he kind of fit in on this team? I don't know. But at the same time, you can't make him feel that way. He has elements. He has points. Like he was the top point getting defenseman joining the Maple Leafs. Like that's not anything to sneeze at on a team that, sure, it was kind of on the outside looking in, but wasn't completely out of it. You can't dismiss what Washington was doing completely. So there is a role for him there, but I think they're going to use this time to figure out what that is. I don't think he's going to necessarily do enough to push anyone out of a spot per se. But if Liljegren starts to play himself out of the lineup, or there's an injury, or they need more offense, that's Erik Gustafsson's role. And I think by mentioning him unprompted is just a way of just controlling the message and making him feel like he's still very much a part of the team and not just an extra, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to completely just say, he's not really in our plans. And then, a bunch of guys go down and you have to throw him out there after making him feel like
he's mentioned
wasn't
that.
in your plans.
He's mentioned that there was that concerted effort in one of the practice days. I can't remember which one. It was this past week. He said, you don't want to run into a situation where you have a pecking order, you think what you have, and then all regular season, you didn't play this guy, and all of a sudden you have to throw him in. It was actually his justification for why he was doing so many 11-7 type situations, now that I recall. So, I mean, that's definitely part of it as well.
Yeah. Poor old Connor Timmins, who doesn't get referenced at all anymore, because he's, the bottom of the rung right now as far as the depth chart goes, because so many guys have gotten ahead of him. But, yeah. You have too many defensemen that can play at the NHL level right now, which is a good problem to have. But, they're trying to work everyone in, trying to make everyone feel comfortable right now as they get closer to the playoffs. But Connor Timmins, just trying to stay sharp. Going to need a lot of bodies to go down, unfortunately, to get into a game at this point. But he did sign that contract, so the Leafs clearly, feel a certain way about him moving forward. But it's got to be tough to watch what's happening right now.
Well, we'll see, because it's funny you mentioned this. I'm glad you did, actually, because friend of Go Goat Sports, Frankie Corrado, I had a chance to catch up with him in the press box yesterday. And we're talking about Connor Timmins' situation, how it's kind of similar to Frankie's, but Frankie's like, yeah, but they didn't give me a 2-year, $1.1 million average extension at that point. And then, because I was the one who broke that story when I was working at The Athletic, when I talked to him and he kind of spilled the beans about, kind of just dying on the vine for a couple months. And so I just kind of said to him, I said, if they gave you that contract, would you have just not talked to me about that? He's like, if they gave me that contract, Lou could have stapled my mouth shut. I thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's just funny seeing it from that perspective, how just, money and all that other stuff and just security will do more than enough to just let him buy his time and be on that developmental path for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, a few months ago, Connor Timmins was not doing much with the Arizona Coyotes. So I think he's pretty happy right now in the situation that he finds him in, and has that contract and has that security at least for next season as well. So he's not in a bad spot by any means, but it's got to be tough when every time you get out there, you seemingly put up a point, and you've done some pretty good things with this team, but hard to find some ice time right now for the Maple Leafs defenseman. But before we wrap things up, got a couple of more items to get to. And Ilya Samsonov, of course, did not play in this game, but he did not dress as Joseph Woll was called up. And we found out from Sheldon Keefe that Samsonov's still a little banged up, of course, despite his impressive performance on Friday against Carolina, and also expecting the birth of a child. So a lot of Maple Leafs babies going around these days. Take that for what you will, but congrats to Samsonov and his partner, of course. But the whole thing about him being banged up at this point of the season, I mean, everybody's kind of banged up. Nobody's at 100% in the way they were at the start of the year, but it does give you a little bit of concern that maybe they're still being a little bit cautious with him. What do you make of the Samsonov situation, and how long do you expect him to be away from the team?
Not very long. I mean, outside of the birth of the child, he's going to miss whatever that constitutes, right? Like, there is going to be that element. But the messaging today was kind of weird, because this morning you wake up and you see that there wasn't even an emergency basis announcement, even though it was emergency basis in the end. But you just see Joseph Baldwin called up. It's a Matt Murray scheduled start against the Ottawa Senators, and you're like, oh boy. Like, that was my initial reaction. When I saw that, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, what's going on here? I did have in the back of my mind that maybe there was this case, but then they could have just said this, but they don't do it. Like, there's a pecking order with the Leafs where, like, the coach has to say these things, right? So I guess that's why they waited, and they did a morning avail on the tail end of back-to-backs, which also isn't normal. But surely enough, this is what they did. And yeah, I'm not too concerned. The problem with Ilya, and I don't want to say it's a problem, but he's kind of old school, even though he's only 25, in that if something's bothering him, or there's some sort of issue or something, he's not forthright about it. He comes from an era of, like, just work through it or whatever. And it's so counter to all the sports science and all this other stuff that the Maple Leafs kind of work with. And you saw it in that game where he injured his knee against the Boston Bruins. He stayed in that game after that save. And, it wasn't until they kind of went to him in the intermission and realized, okay, you can't play anymore. Like, it's one of these things. So there's been more of a conscious effort now to just make sure that he doesn't overextend something and that a knock turns into something. Remember, there was that, I can't remember which game it was. I wrote about it. All these games seem to kind of blend into each other, but he was kind of slow to get up toward the end of the game. It was against the Kraken. He was slow to get up at the very end. And then I asked him what was going on there, and he said, quote unquote, it was nothing crazy. That was his way of saying it, but it was something, just nothing crazy. And that something might have, can build up, and they have to be very careful with it. And, the Leafs made a point to not improve their goaltending. So this is what they've got. It's still the number one liability in my mind in terms of if something can go wrong, it would probably be in that spot. So, they have to be very careful in that regard now in how they treat all this stuff going forward. And so, I'm curious to see just kind of the workload here, but Matt Murray having a pretty good game. That's exactly what they wanted, because now they can kind of lean on him a little bit more. And maybe now, even though he gave up 4 goals, he could be a bit justified in it.
Yeah. Sheldon Keefe is like, justification. I said, he's been playing great despite the numbers. And, tonight that finally was the case, where the numbers did not look particularly good as far as the 4 goals, but the 923 save percentage, the 48 saves. I mean, if he's going to do that, you're going to feel pretty good about the effort that he gave you. All right, let's wrap things up. Time for Media Meal Musings, as the Maple Leafs were on the road tonight in Ottawa at the Canadian Tire Center. Now, was the first game this year in Ottawa as well? I'm trying to remember back. It was. This is number 2, the second go-round in Ottawa for the Emil Music. I do not remember your grade.
Sorry. I misheard you. This is the first time in Ottawa this season.
So it is the first time. Okay, so I was trying to figure at the beginning of the season if it was in Toronto or if it was in Ottawa. It was
in Toronto for both Matt Murray, not scheduled starts where he didn't play. They were both in Toronto.
All right, so this is the first game in Ottawa this year, your first chance of this season to taste the menu at Canadian Tire Center. What is your grade for Emil Musics?
I'm going to say this was a C. Like, the price was whatever, $12 was all right. You know, a lot of pasta, only 2 proteins. There was a beef, which was okay. I didn't even have the fish. I didn't like the look of it per se. And then they had a crudité that was kind of like a mixed crudité salad. So yeah, I mean, the Ottawa meal is pretty basic kind of meat and potatoes. They did have some potatoes as well, but I'm trying to cut out a lot of the carbs because, I would say that, these meals are starting to take a toll when you cover all the 82 games. So, you have to be kind of very careful in that regard. So, I didn't have the potatoes, even though they looked pretty good, but, I went strictly with the protein and some of the salad, and it was okay, passing grade, not something I would necessarily kind of just say you must have it. They moved the room of the media meal to something bigger, which was kind of a different experience for me. It always used to be like right when you come into the building. It's the only one of all the NHL buildings where you literally come in to check in through security and the media meal door is like literally right there. Like you don't go through steps or a different part of the building. It's all like whack smack dab right in front of your face when you walk in, which is kind of interesting.
All right, so a C, tough grade for the Senators, but as you mentioned, the options weren't particularly great, and it didn't seem like you're in the mode to carb load, which is probably the best way to not go about things before.
I did have some of the pasta, but it was okay. It was like tortellini or something. It was okay, but it wasn't super fantastic. Then they also had the pasta salad with the pasta, which had like some cheese and olives in it. And then my biggest challenge there was trying to get some of that without getting any of the olives, which is damn near impossible because they kind of stick everywhere.
Yeah, I'm impartial on olives. Sometimes I don't mind them. Other times can't stand them. So I don't really have a thought on olives, but tough one tonight for the Senators as far as the hockey game goes. And the media meal, which comes in at a C grade for David Alter tonight on this edition of Media Meal Musings. But we'll see what the next one is going to be like as they'll head off to Long Island on Tuesday for the next Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show. The Maple Leafs and Islanders will square off the Pierre Engvall revenge game. We'll see how the clean-shaven Mr. Engvall fares against his former team. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter, Rinkwide TOR, Alter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.